So this video is going to wrap up the gallery walk, and you are going to fill out this circular chart for the 6 steps of a plant life cycle. So as you go, make sure you are drawing pictures and labeling the pictures for each section and writing a bit of information so that you remember what is included in each step and you can look back on it later. The first step we are going to talk about is the seed step of a plant life cycle. And keep in mind that this is a cycle, so it continues to go around and around. And that's why you have a circular graphic organizer to fill out, because the plant cycle, we could really look at any stage, but each individual plant starts from the seed. So that's where we're going to start. On your virtual gallery walk, you may have seen some images of seeds and videos of plants sprouting from seeds. But what's inside of these seeds that makes it able to grow and sprout into a plant? Well, the first structure that's labeled on our picture is called the seed coat. And the seed coat is a hard protective layer around the seed that holds the embryo in the food store. So it is a protective layer and allows storage inside of the seed. So next we have the embryo, which is protected by the seed coat, and this embryo is where the plant is held, and it'll eventually develop into an adult plant. And finally, we have the food store, which is kind of what it sounds like. It is food stored inside of the seed for the plant to use until it's able to make its own food. So in your first segment that is labeled seeds, make sure that you have the drawing of a seed and you label it. And we can also include some of the information we found in our gallery walk by labeling the embryo as the tiny plant inside the seed, the food store, which is the food stored in the seed for the young plant to use to grow, and finally our seed coat, which is the hard protective outer covering. The second stage we are going to talk about in our plant's life is the germination stage. And as you can see, this is the growth of a seed into a baby plant. So you might have seen some pictures and videos of this on your virtual gallery walk. But let's go ahead and draw an example picture for us to refer back to in our germination section. And that includes the plant sprouting out of the soil, and you can even see the roots and the seed, and the leaves that begin to form on the top are actually called the foliage leaves, so we can go ahead and label those as well. And when we are referring back to germination, we need to know what the right conditions are for our plant to start sprouting. And in your gallery walk, you may have found water, warmth, and air or oxygen as those conditions that we need. Plants can get water from rainfall and other sources. For example, if we have plants in our backyard, maybe we provide the water from the hose, and they get warmth from the sun and light as well. And then the air is the oxygen in the atmosphere and all around the plant. So as germination begins, the seed uses its food store that we saw in our last stage and the 3 conditions that we just talked about in order to begin sprouting and start growing above the ground. The third step in our plant's life is the stems and roots stage. And you have seen these, I'm sure, in many of the pictures, especially during the gallery walk. But in the picture shown in front of you, there is a plant sprouted out of the ground past its germination stage, and the stems are what you can see poking out of the ground. And below the ground, we have the roots, which are colored in brown in this picture. And you may be wondering why we need the roots and stems. Well, the roots are what hold the plant in place. So say there's a really windy day and the wind is just blowing. Instead of our plant just blowing right out of the ground, the roots hold it in its place. So they are buried under the soil, and that's how they help keep the plant in its place, and they are used to drink up nutrients and water from the soil. So we want to make a note about the roots on our chart to make sure that we remember why they're there and what they do. And the second part is the stems, which are actually above the ground, and these also help the plant to stand up. So without the stems, the plant would be kind of tipping over to the side, kind of sagging, but the stems are strong and can hold up the rest of the plant. And the purpose of the stems is to move water from the roots to the leaves, so it connects the roots and the leaves. So this is another important plant structure that we should include in our notes. We are now on to our fourth step in the stage, which is when the leaves begin to develop. So we talked about the stems and roots, but attached to those stems comes the leaves, and the leaves are in charge of taking in the sunlight and air to end up making food for the plant. So if you remember, the seeds were holding a little bit of food in their food store, but after the plant sprouts, it begins to be able to make food for itself through its leaves. So the leaves have a very important job because they are making food for the whole plant, from the sun, the carbon dioxide in the air, and the water that's taken in by the roots. Our fifth stage of the plant life cycle is the flower or flowering stage. And as you can see from the picture, we have the roots, leaves, and stems that we've talked about in our previous stages, but now the flower has started to develop. And flowers are in charge of making seeds and pollen to help the plants reproduce. And remember, reproduce means to make more of the plant. So if the plants didn't have these flowers to make the seeds and pollen, they wouldn't be able to make any more plants. But it's important to also remember that not all plants make a flower, so this only applies to some plants. So not only are our flowers so beautiful to have around in our garden or around the neighborhood or maybe even in your house, but they also have an important job to make sure the plants can reproduce to grow more plants and keep spreading. We have now made it to the final stage of our plant's life, and that is pollination. So in order for our plants to reproduce, kind of like we talked about during the flower stage, they must have this pollen or their seeds spread to a new flower or plant. So bees and other pollinators are attracted to the nectar of the flower, and when they go in to get this nectar, the pollen can stick to their body, and then they can fly to another flower, and the pollen falls onto the new flower, allowing it to reproduce. Actually, the wind can also act as a pollinator, carrying pollen from one plant to another. And it doesn't have to be just bees. It can be butterflies, birds, any kind of animal that helps to spread the seeds and pollen of a plant to help them reproduce. We have made it through all 6 stages and drawn pictures and put a little bit of information to help us remember, but we also have to know what happens after pollination. Well, just like I said at the beginning, the plant life is a cycle, which means it repeats and continues to go around and around again. So after a plant is pollinated, we can start the cycle all over again with the seed stage and continue around the cycle. Now that we have made it through the entire cycle, it's time for you to try it out on your own and explore your own plants. So go ahead and head back to the presentation to get started on the next part of the lesson.